And he said, "Well, actually, I'm going on. I'm a Celebrity, and I'm leaving for Australia tonight." And I said, "When you come back?" He said, "Well, I don't really know." And I said, "Well, look, you know what? There's a precedent here with Nadine." I said, "You know what this means." I said, "Are you asking me, Matt? Let's be honest. Are you asking me, or are you telling me?" He said, "Well, I suppose I'm telling you, really." I said, "Well, okay. Well, look, you know how this is going to end." I said, "I will just bounce it off my number 10 colleagues, but I think we all know where this is heading."
This morning we're talking about whipping in the political sense rather than anything else. This week's serial troublemaker Carl Turner, who once came onto the show and told us he was the MP who tweeted the most about this party, had the Labour whip withdrawn. That means he now sits as an independent MP. Here's Carl Turner speaking to Kate Borsay on Times Radio just after the news broke.
I think the Chief Whip has made a mistake. I think the Chief Whip should have the good grace to tell me exactly, spell out what I've done, so that gives me an opportunity to improve my conduct, apologise to colleagues if in fact I've offended any particular colleague.
And this is what he said when he came on this show.
Pleased, he's very fortunate to be represented by, I'm told, Britain's most prolific tweeting MP.
By which, of course, he meant himself. So let's discuss whipping and what it's like to have the whip taken away with Lord Hart, the former chief whip under Rishi Sunak. He's written a book called Ungovernable, The Political Diaries of a Chief Whip. Welcome to the show, Lord Hart.
Morning. My Lord's colleague.
You weren't ever my chief whip, were you?
No, thank goodness. Yeah.
I got out before the Hart regime came into play. Have you worked out why Carl Turner had the whip taken away? Are you surprised that he had the whip taken away?
I'm not completely surprised. I think it's been rumoured quite a lot. And I mean, I don't know what the sort of orders from number 10 are to Johnny Reynolds, chief whip, but those things don't normally just happen on a whim. It's normally quite a big build-up. There's quite often, there's sort of other factors in play. And it's always tends to be a last resort, not a sort of first reaction. So my guess is it's been cooking for some time.
So did you take the whip away from anyone when you were the chief whip?
Yeah, we did. I mean, and it was, unfortunately, towards the end, it became quite a regular feature. We tried, Rishi was very adamant during his regime that we shouldn't make martyrs of people. I think I was probably a little bit more gung-ho than he was. And he was always, look, we mustn't create martyrs. We mustn't encourage defections. We mustn't, in a sense, give people what they want, which is a bit of notoriety. In the end, so what, who cares what they say on Twitter? If they vote against, a sort of budget, that's one thing. But if they're just voicing off on Twitter, probably just let them do that into, their own echo chamber and not overreact. And I think that's probably the right thing, actually. So we tried not to, but there were some occasions when there were criminal accusations, criminal arrests and charge that time, where you literally have no option. You have to do it, and you have to do it quite quickly.
But let's leave that aside. Let's think, what is the political threshold, in your view, of taking away the whip? Because people don't really understand necessarily that taking away the whip is a very, very big deal, because the person who loses the whip effectively loses the right to stand again as that party's candidate. So in effect, it ends, if the whip is kept off until the election, it effectively ends their political career. So what is the political threshold for you? It's not a nasty little tweet. I could understand why voting against flagship government legislation could be a trigger. Is there any other? Did you have any other?
Well, famously, both Nadine Dorries before my day and Matthew Hancock during my day had the whip withdrawn for going on "I'm a Celebrity, get me out of here," because the view was you can't just take a open-ended holiday just when you feel like it. Nobody else in any business in the country would get away with that, and we took the view that MPs probably should be attempting to set an example. So, but you're right. I mean, as we get closer to an election, as we knew we were heading quite dramatically in that. Hang on, let me just turn that off. Heading directly, that is yet its career ending. So you got to be really careful. The other thing the political consideration was, of course, we were entering a period where defections were possible. In the old days, they didn't happen very much. But with the arrival of a sort of right of centre alternative to the Conservatives, as some people saw it, it didn't take much, as we discovered with Lee Anderson, to you take the whip off somebody for perfectly legitimate reasons, and they thanks very much, we'll go down the road and join somebody else now, and that can be a bit self-defeating. So these things were, we used to agonise over them before actually pulling the plug.
You referenced Matt Hancock. Let's hear a clip of Matt talking to his fellow contestants in I'm a Celebrity about the controversy he faced during the pandemic.
You got a lockdown fine, didn't you?
No, of course I didn't.
I thought you broke lockdown rules.
No, I did not.
All right,
I didn't break any.
You were socialising someone outside of your household.
Yeah, I didn't break any laws. Guidance is different, but anyway, I don't want to go.
Oh, so there's a rule and there's a law.
Guidance.
The guidance is guidance.
Right.
But the problem was it was my guidance.
Exactly.
That's why. So
why did you break your own guidance?
Because it was a mistake, because I fell in love with somebody and we
And
all
I
know
was
what
taken by
happened.
love.
Well, it's true.
I'm trying to think what celebrity Matt Hancock sounds like. It's really annoying me now. Text in if you sounds like a particular comedian that I keep hearing on the television. Did you take the whip away from Hancock?
Yeah.
So what
we
did
did.
You
I remember.
So
I remember he rang me.
Take us in to the moment, Simon Hart.
Right, okay, so it's fairly early on. I hadn't been chief whip too long, and I get this call from Matt. This is all in my book, and I sort of feel I know Matt well enough that he wouldn't mind me saying this again. And I get this call from him saying, could he pop over? He needed a quick word. And I said, yeah, sure, you can come over tomorrow. And he said, no, it really needs to be today. And I thought that's why I'm quite what the urgency is. And so we made a gap in the diary, and over he came and he said, look, I'm wondering if I can have sort of immediate leave of absence for a period of time. And I, in all my innocence, I didn't know what that was going on. In all my innocence, I thought, it must be something serious. I said, yeah, sure, when roughly how long? He said, well, I don't really know. It depends how I get on. And the penny started to slowly drop, and I said to him, "Are you?" And he said, "Well, actually, I'm going on. I'm a Celebrity, and I'm leaving for Australia tonight." I said, "When you come back?" He said, "Well, I don't really know." I said, well, look, you know what? There's a precedent here with Nadine. I said, you know what this means. I said, are you asking me, Matt? Well, let's be honest. Are you asking me or are you telling me? He said, well, I suppose I'm telling you, really. I said, well, okay, well, look, you know how this is going to end. I said, I will just bounce it off my number 10 colleagues, but I think we all know where this is heading. And sure enough, we all agreed what we agreed. I then, interestingly, comparison with Carl Turner is Matt was obviously on a plane for 18 hours then, so I had to formally remove the whip by email or by text because there was no way of actually getting hold of it. So he woke up in Sydney or wherever the hell he was going to a message from me which confirmed it. And I dare say he probably would have wanted me to talk to him face to face, but we were past the point at which that was possible. But being Matt, he took it incredibly well. Equally, right towards the end, when we suddenly needed all hands on deck for the Rwanda vote, and there was a bit of a panic going on, I remember doing sort of deal with Matt, saying, look, if you can go into the chamber and make a long speech, but I don't care what about, for as long as you can, we've got to keep this debate going up till 7 o'clock. He was the first person to step up to the mark, made a long speech on a subject he probably didn't know much about, and just before the election, he got the whip back.
Excellent. Well, look, I lost the whip in 2019, along with 20 other Conservative MPs, when we tried to block a no-deal Brexit, or more accurately, we tried to stop Boris Johnson illegally procuring Parliament. The team have dug up this clip of me speaking to Matthew Wright at the time.
How was that delivered to you? Was it by a politician, an elected official, or by some shadowy figure in the corridors of Westminster?
No, it was delivered on Twitter through journalists, saying that this is what the government was planning to do. No one ever said it to my face. And but I thought, can I look myself in the mirror on Wednesday morning, knowing that I voted with the government, and people far braver than me, who've been fighting this battle far harder than I have lost the whip. I got it. So just a little insight for you, ex-Chief Whip Simon Hart. It's a pretty traumatic experience, losing the whip. I mean, I felt mixed emotions. I eventually got a letter from the Chief Whip, Michael Spencer, who is now on my wall alongside the letter sacking me as Culture Minister. But I felt really angry, weirdly, losing the whip. It's a very, very big deal to vote against your government. Boris rang me 1 minute before the vote at 10 o'clock at night to try and persuade me not to vote against the government. But it was the first time I'd ever done it. And I felt, who are you to take the whip away from me? I've been a loyal servant to this party all my life, campaigned for it as a teenager, been a loyal MP and a good minister. And you, prosecuting this ridiculous policy, have forced me into this position. And now you're taking the whip away from me. So I think a lot of people who lose the whip are entitled to feel quite cheesed off. And it's an interesting balance. I'm going on a bit of a rant here, because I understand your need to keep discipline. But did you understand as Chief Whip what a big deal it was to take the whip away from a loyal foot soldier?
Yeah, that's why it was always a last resort. I think we'd always try and come up with some other solution first. And I remember having many conversations with Rishi about this and trying to just ascertain, is this person actually, have they got a really honourable, decent position, which they've always held, and therefore that should be respected. We're a large group of people with lots of different interests, different backgrounds. Therefore, there should be a flexibility. And by and large, that's where we always were. And the only times we really said, right, sorry, this is good, we cannot go on with this, is where somebody sort of flagrantly and sort of malevolently attempted to bring down the government and to try and stop the government delivering its manifesto commitments, upon which those people themselves were elected. That was a no-go area. So you couldn't vote against the budget, for example, and not expect there to be repercussions. Pretty well everything else, apart from criminal activity, was up for discussion. And of course, one of the pressures these days, and I go into it in the book quite a lot, is, of course, and we've seen it in so many different ways during Starmer's leadership, is the question that journalists always ask about any scandal is, okay, who knew what when did you know that? When did the Whip's office know that this person had been arrested? When did you tell the Prime Minister that this person had been arrested or charged, whatever it was? And so, Speed would say you couldn't hang around on those really serious things. You had to get on with it, because otherwise the next accusation was we dragged our feet, we'd made where victims might have been involved, we'd made life even worse for them than we needed to, because we'd been dithering or trying to cover it up. So we had to be really clinical. But on policy stuff, frankly, we tried everything else first. We asked people, tried to keep people out of the building, tried to persuade them to go to America for a few days so they didn't have to be put in this embarrassing position. It was only in extremis that we used to pull the whip for people for exactly the reasons that you experienced. And that time, I remember, there were 20 of you, I think. Some of the sort of best known names in the Conservative Party were de-whipped, or whatever the expression is. And it was sort of very counterproductive. It left a very nasty taste.
It did. Let's end with Neil Duncan Jordan, a Labour MP who lost the whip for voting against the welfare bill. This is what he told me about losing the whip.
Won't a lot of your colleagues think you're being incredibly unhelpful when Keir Starmer's back is against the wall?
Well, to be honest, since I came in, I think people have thought I've been incredibly unhelpful. I was one of the ones who got suspended before Christmas. So I don't think that's the issue. This isn't a personality contest, right? It's not about that. This is about what you think is right for the party, what you think is right for the country, and how you think we should do business.
Oh, well, there you go. And we don't have time to discuss Neil Duncan Jordan, but Simon Hart, thank you so much for coming on the show. Dan,